Everybody, BATJAC J.W. coming to you. We're going to be comparing the Colt to the Smith and Wesson. Two of my favorite guns, definitely as far as revolvers go. I do love Smith and Wessons, and I do like Colts. They're pretty, they're both sexy. Okay, let's get into it and start looking at some things. Let's go ahead and make sure that we are unloaded. Okay, so first thing up is Colts go clockwise in the cylinder. Okay, something to remember, because if you're going to load one in, you better make sure you put it in at say 11 o'clock, so when you index it and everything and get ready to fire, you don't wind up with a click. And for a Smith and Wesson, okay, they go counterclockwise, so make sure that cylinder's locked into place before we operate the action. And yes, you can see goes counterclockwise. So you can see the lead-ins where they go the opposite direction on each other. That's another way to tell which way the cylinder turns on that particular revolver. Most of them go counterclockwise. They kind of copied the Smith on that. Okay, and the cylinder release latch is a big one. Now Colt, to me, it always stands out. I can always tell it's a Colt when I see that. Even though the Rock Island Armory did copy that on their M206. If you checked out the channel, you've seen multiple videos on that. They kind of copied that. But Colts, you pull that latch back, and that's what opens up the cylinder. Okay. And Smith, you push, and it opens up the cylinder. So that's a little bit different. Okay. Now, the hammer, the firing pin. A lot of people like the old vintage Smiths because the firing pin is on the hammer. That's one way you can tell them apart. The new ones that they're producing, the firing pin is on the frame. And some people don't like that. Some people complain about it. But ironically, what is considered a top shelf double action revolver, the Python, has always had the firing pin on the frame. Imagine that. It's not on the hammer. So sights, as far as sights go, I painted the front sight of my Model 19 just so I could pick it up a little bit easier. Some of the Pythons do have an orange insert, as well as the Smiths. And for the most part, they're pretty identical. Grips, both checkered. The Python seems to have a raised checkering, and I think a lot of the Colts do the kind of a raised checkering. And what I mean by that is you can actually see it rises above the grips, versus the Smith seems a little bit more recessed and as part of it, where it looks like one flat surface and doesn't have like an actual raised surface. Okay, so now let's dive in to a little bit more comparison. Okay, got everything opened up. So if you notice right away on the Colts, everything is set up on the left side, and then the Smith and Wessons, everything is on the right side. Okay, let's look at the side plate first. Here's the side plate off the Colt with its the cylinder release latch comes off with it, and there it lives, and it lives inside the side plate right here. And be careful, because there's a little spring and everything in there. And the side plate to the Smith and Wesson. Okay, so here's them out in the open. So let's take a look at some parts. Obviously, let's go ahead and identify. It's a wooden stick now, not a metal one. You got the hammer. Okay. And here's where some of the things start to change, where you can see a lot of things are the same though, like the cylinder rotation hand right here. There it is on the Smith. Okay, the Smith actually has like a cutout and a window inside the frame. The Colt, it's pretty much out there. There is no real extra. You can see how on the Smith, what I'm trying to explain to you is there's like a slot cut into it. The Colt, there is not. It just comes through right there. The side plate kind of covers the rest of it. And one thing, if you notice, just take a look at these two. The Smith and Wesson is pretty out and straightforward. You can pretty much understand what's going on in there. The Colt, however, has a little bit more to hide, because everything is kind of, if you look, there's some things in the back of the hammer right there that's running down to the trigger, things like that. So one of the kind of a big difference here on the Colt is the Colt really has one main spring that pretty much does a lot of everything, and that's right here. And it runs and it puts the tension on the rebound lever, which is right here. And that's staked in with a pin, not staked in, but pinned in with this pin. And so that right there is what operates, you know, that puts the tension on the rotation hand and the hammer. So that's what it's doing, and the trigger and the hammer rather. Okay. And then here on the Smith and Wesson, you got the main spring here, which is the hammer spring, and then for the trigger, you have a rebound slide with its own spring in there. So there's kind of a difference there. The internal safety to prevent if there's ever a hammer, a push off or something, to stop it as an added safety. And this what makes it safe to carry these things at 6 shots is this safety bar right here. I'm probably mispronouncing it, but you get what I'm trying to say. Is right here on the Smith, it just kind of sits right in there, and this right here is what stops the hammer in here, goes right up in there in case it ever goes forward without it wanting to. That's what's going to save you. Now the Colt is a little bit harder to see because it's tucked away, but there it is right there, and it runs behind the hammer. Here's the latch, the lock latch that locks the cylinder in place. You can actually see it here through the frame if I move it. That's how it works. Okay, so we'll get into that and talk a little bit about how that cylinder release latch works on a Colt and how they. So on the other end here, on the side plate, we'll take this off. The latch itself has a hole in it, and that hole slips over the lockup latch peg sticking out here. So when you pull on it, pulls it back, goes out of the frame, and where it's locking up into, where that head is going into, you can see it kind of goes forward and protrudes outside the frame. Where that's going is into the face of the cylinder ratchet right here in this cutout. So that's how it works. And of course on here the cylinder is held into the crane by a spring, and I'll show you because I don't want to take all that apart. It's not necessary, it's not fun, and if you ruin that spring in there, it's kind of a nightmare. I'll tell you a little bit about it. Okay, so here's the crane and cylinder off the Smith and Wesson. The crane comes off as a separate piece, and how that's different, and reason why it doesn't come off on the Colt, because on the Colt, inside the crane, which would be here, is the spring, and it's held in by a collar, a lock collar that is threaded on the inside, much like a shotgun choke, and that's how that holds in. The spring on the Smiths are on the extractor rod itself, and the rods, the newer rods on the Smiths, kind of what I consider newer, because back in the day they actually had a knurled end, but now it's actually one part of the whole rod, and they just knurl it. What I mean by that is the Colts, actually this can unscrew and that tip can come off. Okay, now let's go into the parts on here and show you how the release latch on the Smith works. Alright, so how the Smith works is a lot different than the Colt. On the face, you actually have a pin protruding there, and if you actually push on that pin, it's spring loaded. A lot different than the Colt, where it's just an empty pocket. If you look at the frame of the Smith, now where you're looking at is right there. and you'll see the big scratch that goes on the inside, and that's just from the cylinder opening and closing, and that is from that pin dragging on the frame. That's just kind of one of the things that are going to happen to this gun on a Smith and Wesson, or most any gun that uses that method, and a lot of them do. Okay, so if you look right there, that's where it is, and I'm pulling on the cylinder release latch here. That's a better, I guess, a better view for you. You can see. And how it works is when the cylinder is closed, that pin pushes into this frame like that. So when you're ready to release it, by pushing on the lever forward, you're pushing that pin out, and the pin is going into the cylinder again, like that. And then that allows you to pop the cylinder open. Go ahead and take this out and show this to you. When you take this out, you want to be careful because of that. There's a spring and a pin right in here, and they can fly out of there, and you might not even know what it looks like, or might not even know it was there. Okay, so there's the driving head that pushes the pin on the cylinder through there. It comes out there, and the latch is really just a latch, and it fits over like that through the frame, and then you can see it's threaded, and it has this cap that screws onto it and holds it in place. So that's how that works. Like I said, in comparison to the way the Colt works, where the latch itself lives inside the side plate with a spring inside the side plate. Okay, so the time for the hammers. Now the hammers, for the most part, now the Colt Python does have a nice hammer on it, I will say that. So I've always liked the look on it, nice checkering and everything on it. Colts, for some reason, always had their flats shiny, and that's bare metal. It's not blued, so you want to keep it that oiled because it can rust. And Smith's, that color case hardening, this one is the wide hammer on the Smith, so they're kind of identical. Again, the firing pin on there and none on there. Okay, the Smith and Wesson. And here's the stirrup that holds the spring here. Okay, and the spring on the Colt here is like this, and it lives like that. And that's how way it works. The Smith and Wesson, it's that flat spring, and it does that. It's two springs side to side. So somebody just bent theirs in half. Okay. Moving on. Here's a better look. Now you can see that this is open a little bit. How that how the block works, and what we're talking about is this, the thing that stops the hammer from protruding forward without you wanting it to and firing around. So when I pull the trigger, you see it moves out of the way, and what we're talking about is this right here. So when I pull that trigger, see how it drops down and moves out of the way so the hammer can go forward and fire the round. So let's go ahead and get that out of there to compare it to the Smith. Here it is, and it connects to the trigger right in here with this, and lives like that, and that's how it works. The Smith, how it works is it connects to the rebound slide. There's a pin right there, or like a head, and it lives like this. So that's how the trigger pushes on that and then drops it down, and then when it comes back, it pops it back up. So that's how the Smith and Wesson works. So it's different in own spring operation for the Smith versus like the Colt uses just the one spring pushing down on the rebound bar or rebound lever. Okay, Smith uses a rebound slide with its own spring. So there's some two different entire operations going on there. Okay, so while we got this off, and that's the thing, if you're gonna mess around with this stuff, be careful. The Colts are full of little pieces. The cylinder lockup latch, or the cylinder stop hand right in here that protrudes to the bottom of the frame, that's how it works. It's right in here, and it's actually screwed into the frame, and it's held in by a spring right there. The tension is held in right there. Okay. Now the firing pin, you have to take off the sight, and the firing pin will come out of there. So that's the way the Python holds it in. Now the Detective Special or the Diamondback per se, the firing pin is actually on the hammer. So there's a difference that would, I guess, you know, going back to what I said, how pretty much how they're the same. They are, except for a couple of differences. That is one of the differences. The Python, the firing pin is inside there. On the Smith, the cylinder lockup hand or cylinder stop hand, it's right here. It lives in there, and you can see there's a little spring right there. And the spring is just wedged between the frame and that latch. Now in the earlier models, the 5-screw model, there's actually a screw right here in the trigger guard. That counts how it makes it 5. You know, they got the extra one up here, which they've eliminated. Then of course the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That would be the 5-screw model. That 5th screw, if you want to call it the 5th screw, is what puts the tension on that spring. They've eliminated that and just put it as the frame itself holding it in place. So not much else to go over really. You got the trigger on a Smith. It's got the rotation hand for the cylinder mounted on it. You can take that out. You can see inside there it's held in by its own little spring. The Colt, there it is, of course, with its beautiful bluing, and it is blued on all sides. All right, so go ahead and put these things, get all these parts back together.